Hey friends, it's Laurie. I'm so happy you stopped by. Today I'm making 3 sunflower inspired DIYs. I did use mostly Dollar Tree supplies and I really hope you enjoy making them with me. So let's get busy. I'm starting my project by using one of the plastic tubs, and you can find this in the toy department at the Dollar Tree. I'm also using a piece of floral foam, and you can pick this up at the Dollar Tree as well. They come in white and green, and I just so happen to have a leftover piece of white, so I'm using that for this project. I placed the block in the tub, and the tub has rounded edges, so using my knife, I'm just cutting away to make it fit inside the tub. Now that the bottom fits, I'm cutting off the top so I have a nice flat base. With my piece of foam now cut to the correct size, I'm attaching it inside the tub using my hot glue gun. As an accent on the outside of the tub, I'm using this pretty sunflower ribbon. It's 1 inch and I picked it up at Hobby Lobby. I wrapped it around my tub to get my measurement and gave myself an extra 3 inches. Now using my hot glue gun, I attach the ribbon around the outside of the tub. To finish up, I glued the 2 ends together on the end of the tub. I gave myself the extra ribbon so that they could overlap just a bit, and then I cut off the excess with my scissors. For the sunflowers in my tub, I'm using 3 of these metal sunflowers that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. And what I love about these is the head of the flower is actually on a little spring and it just kind of bobbles around a little bit. I want my sunflowers to be at different heights, so I just tried the tub up against them to decide the length. Now that all 3 stems are cut, I'm adding them into the tub. And then to be sure they don't move, I'm adding some hot glue to each stem. The tub is lightweight and I want to give it a little more stability, so I'm using some of these glass beads that I had picked up at the Dollar Tree. And then all I did was add some to each end of the tub. To cover the white floral block, I'm using some of this reindeer moss that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I added some hot glue onto the top of the foam and then sprinkled on the moss. This is what I chose to use, but honestly, you can use anything that you'd like to hide that floral foam. When I was adding the moss, I didn't load it up because I do want to kind of mimic water, and I'm using 4 of these blue leaves off of this Dollar Tree leaf and pumpkin stem. To attach them, I just added some hot glue onto the moss and then placed down the leaves. This was so easy and inexpensive to make, and I think it's a unique piece for my fall bath decor, and I just love those little sunflowers because they're just so springy and cute. To finish up this project, I'm using the same sunflower ribbon and I'm making a simple bow. I used my glue gun and attached it to the front of the tub, and with that, my sunflowers in a bathtub are ready to display. I wanted to share with you today that I am participating in my monthly friend collab group, and it's being hosted by my sweet friend Liana from Liana DIY. This month we have 3 guest hosts: Tammy from the Rusted Willow, JC from Crafting with JC, and Oila from Oila DIY Adventures. You can check them out along with my other crafty friends. I will have the fall collab playlist linked below in my description. If you're new to my channel or coming over from the playlist and you're enjoying my video, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a big thumbs up. And to all my returning friends, you know I'm always so happy to see you, and I love reading your comments. To make my sunflower gnomes, I'm using one of the wooden cutouts from the Dollar Tree, and this little gnome comes on a stand. I'm going to give him a base coat, and I'm using some white acrylic paint. I'm actually going to be covering most of him, but I did want to give my gnome some color. When the white has dried, I'm then using some brown acrylic paint, and I'm painting the base. For my gnome's beard, and I always like to try something different, I'm using 2 of these soft white sunflowers, and I picked these up at the Dollar Tree. I removed 2 of the flowers, and because I'm only using the petals, I pulled the flowers apart. On each flower there are 2 sets of petals, and one is just a bit larger than the other. To attach them, I'm adding some hot glue just above the end of the gnome's beard. Now, using one of the larger set of petals, and there's a front and a back, I'm making sure that I'm folding it in half with the front side facing out. I'm now adding on some hot glue just above the folded flowers, folding my next largest in half, and then attaching that into the hot glue. To finish up the beard, I'm once again adding some hot glue just above the folded petals, and now I'm folding my last 2 in half and attaching them. After I added my last flower, I noticed it wouldn't stay folded, so I just added on some hot glue. For my gnome's nose, I'm using a 1-inch wooden bead, and mine has a flat bottom on it, but you can use an assortment of different things for your gnome's nose. I used the same brown acrylic paint as the gnome's base, and I gave it a coat. With the gnome's nose dry, I attached some hot glue in the middle of the top flower and attached the flat end of the nose in place. To make my yellow gnome, I used 2 yellow sunflowers from the Dollar Tree. After I pulled them apart, I attached them onto the gnome the exact same way as the white, painted a nose, and attached that on as well. For the gnome's hats, I'm using a 2.5-inch wired sunflower ribbon, and I picked this up at Hobby Lobby. To get my measurements, I placed the ribbon over the gnome's nose and down each of the sides at an angle, and then used my scissors to cut the ribbon. I added some hot glue to the top of the gnome's nose and attached my ribbon in place. I pulled down each side at an angle and then attach those in place on the back. I'm measuring the next piece of ribbon. I'm slightly overlapping the other, wrapping it around the gnome's head, and then cutting it to size. I added on some hot glue and attached my second ribbon. To add on the top of the gnome's hat, I'm once again measuring my ribbon and cutting it to size. To make the top of the gnome's hat, I folded the center of my ribbon into a point, then folded both sides and the ends under. I added some hot glue to the top and placed on the little cap. Once I had it in place, I then folded over the sides and hot glued it onto the back. The top of the gnome's hat is pretty much freestanding, so to give it a little bend, I just kind of folded it over. For the gnome's arms, I'm using the Dollar Tree burlap ribbon. I measured it across the front of the gnome and I gave myself about 3 extra inches. I placed the ribbon down flat and added some hot glue about a half an inch or so from the edge, and then folded it over and pressed it together. I made sure to use my finger protector because that hot glue is pretty hot. I then added some hot glue onto the fold and then folded the other edge over it. When I was done, I kind of want to mimic folded hands, so I folded the fabric in half and made a knot. To attach the arms, I centered the knot in the middle of the gnome. I turned it over and I attached the 2 ends on the back. And when this gnome was complete, I followed the exact same instructions for my yellow gnome. To give my gnomes a flower to hold onto, I'm using 1 small yellow and 1 small white sunflower from the Dollar Tree. I added a dot of hot glue on each gnome's knot and slipped in a sunflower. To accent the white gnome's flower, I'm using one of these little felt bumblebees, and I had picked these up a while back on Amazon. This step is completely optional, and I just hot glued the bee onto the center of the sunflower. I'm making a bow for the gnome's hats, and I'm using about an 8-inch piece of the Dollar Tree burlap ribbon. I folded one side into the center and then slightly overlapped the other. I'm using a piece of jute to hold my bow together, so I just pinched it in the middle, wrapped the jute around it, and tied it into a knot. When I was done, I cut off the excess jute and then opened the 2 loops. Attaching the bow to the gnome's hats is super easy. I just added some hot glue and popped on the bows. I'm giving this gnome feet, and I'm using one of the heart-shaped chalkboard tags from the Dollar Tree. I turned the tag over and using the same brown acrylic paint, I gave it a coat. With the heart dry and to add on the feet, I placed on some hot glue and then attached my gnome. And for my yellow gnome, I just painted the attached base with the brown paint. And with that, these 2 sunflower gnomes are complete. To make my home sign, I'm using one of the 18-inch wooden plank signs from the Dollar Tree. And because I'm going to paint it, I removed the hanger, and then using my white acrylic paint, I gave the front a complete coat. I let my sign dry completely, and now using my pencil, I'm going to give it a smoky edge. I'm rubbing the edge of the pencil along the edge of the sign, and then rubbing it in with my finger. I'm continue adding the pencil around the outside of the sign and rubbing it in, and this step is completely optional. I'm giving my sign a bit of a rustic look, so this just kind of adds to the vibe. I'm adding the word home to my sign, and I'm using the letters H, M, and E. I picked these up at Michael's. They're 3-inch wooden letters, and they're about a half an inch thick. I used my black acrylic paint, and I gave each of them a coat. I let my letters dry completely, and then, because I want to give them a bit of a rustic look, I used an old piece of sandpaper, and I started rubbing around the outside edges of each letter. If you're looking for a cleaner, crisper sign, then I would just leave the letters plain black and omit this step. Now that I have my letters complete, I'm going to make the O for my sign. Getting started, I'm recycling a small canning ring and lid from some past preserves. My canning ring will be completely covered, but I'm giving it a coat of yellow spray paint just in case something shows through. The lid is going to be completely exposed, so I'm giving it a coat of this nutmeg spray paint. And this is how they'll look when they're sprayed. To wrap my canning ring, I'm using some of this yellow cotton blend fabric that I had on hand. I'm going to use about 30 strips of fabric, and I'm cutting them 9 inches in length and 1 inch in width. And while I was cutting my strips, I was trying to be careful, but if they were a little off here and there, it's not going to matter when you're adding them onto the ring. To add the fabric on my ring, I'm taking 1 strip and making sure that both of the ends match up. I'm then placing the loop inside the ring and pulling the 2 pieces of fabric through it. Now that my first is in place, I'm following the same instructions, and I'm continuing to add the loops onto my ring, making sure to pull them tightly and push them up snugly next to each other. I continued working my way around until I had all 30 attached. I'm working on a small canning ring, but if you want to make a flower with the larger ones, you'll definitely need more strips of fabric. Now that I'm done, and this is pretty much looking like a hot mess, but we're going to clean it up by trimming off the ends of the fabric. I'm matching the 2 ends of the fabric together. I'm folding them in half and then cutting down towards the center at an angle. I continued working my way around the ring until I had turned all the fabric ends into petals. Now that I'm done, you can see where I had looped the fabric on, so I'm going to turn the flower over and pull all the petals to the front. To give the center of my sunflower a little accent, I'm using some black acrylic paint, and I'm just placing it on the end of a paintbrush, and then with another paintbrush I'm tapping against it and giving it a splattered effect. When I was done, I let it dry, and because sometimes it's easy for the paint to scrape off of metal, I like to give mine a coat of Mod Podge. While that's drying, I'm going to add on my hanger, and you can replace the original one. I want mine to be a little bit longer, so I'm cutting about 18 inches of the Dollar Tree jute. I fed it through the 2 original holes and then tied a couple of knots on the back. I then added on a dot of hot glue to each knot to help hold it in place. Now that the center is dry, to attach it to the flower, I'm adding in some hot glue and then attaching it in place. To add the letters and the flower to my sign, I'm first finding their placement. I'm now using my E6000 and attaching them all in place. To finish up, I'm adding a piece of buffalo check ribbon that I had on hand. I'm adding it to the hanger and making a simple bow. And with that, my sunflower home sign is ready to hang. I hope you enjoyed making these DIYs with me, and please be sure to check out the playlist. If you're new to my channel and you haven't yet subscribed and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. I'll see you all very soon. Bye, everybody.